She waited until the bones were picked clean, until the boys were almost done with their mashed potatoes and the only sound left was the scraping of forks against ceramic. That's when she dropped it, not like a bomb, but like a board announcement at a PDA meeting. I'm done with this marriage. No build-up. No warning shot. Just a sentence so flat and deliberate it sliced cleaner than any steak knife on that table. Our younger son, Caleb, blinked first, fork halfway to his mouth, hand trembling just enough to rattle the peas on his plate. The older one, Lucas, stiffened, eyes darting from her to me like he was trying to find the script he'd clearly never been handed. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I looked at her the way you look at a traffic light that just turned red, expected, inevitable, and mildly annoying. You sure? I asked, my tone as casual as if I were asking if she wanted more gravy. She crossed her arms. Not even a flicker of uncertainty on her face. Just that smug, carefully curated expression she always wore when she believed she was finally in control. I'd seen it before on PDA nights when she'd correct the teacher's grammar mid-sentence. At birthday parties, when she'd humble brag about her job promotions to other parents she thought were beneath her. That same posture now stood across the table from me, arms wrapped tightly around herself like armor. I'm done pretending, she said. The boys are old enough. They deserve to see the truth. What truth? That she was bored? That she'd mistaken the mundane for the unbearable? That the life we'd built, 23 years of it, had somehow turned into a performance she was too superior to continue? But I didn't say any of that. I just nodded slowly, then calmly reached for my napkin, wiped my mouth like a man finishing a decent meal at a mediocre restaurant, and stood up. Picked up my plate, half-eaten drumstick and all, and walked it into the kitchen. Behind me, the silence in that dining room became something alive. Something thick. Caleb mumbled, What do you mean? But she didn't answer him. She was watching me, waiting for something. A reaction. An explosion. A begging plea that would give her the satisfaction of superiority. But I gave her none. I rinsed my plate, set it gently in the dishwasher, dried my hands, walked past her on the way to the hallway and said, You might want to cover the chicken. It'll dry out. Then I went into the bedroom. Not to scream into a pillow. Not to pace like a cornered dog. No. I opened the closet and looked at my suits. Which two would I take? She thought that moment would break me. She thought I'd fight. Argue. Beg her to reconsider. She thought I'd sleep in the guest room for weeks, like some pathetic satellite still orbiting the planet she had already left. But something in me shifted when she said it. Not rage. Not heartbreak. Just clarity. She wanted out? Perfect. She could have it. Because if there's one thing she forgot in her little dinner theater performance, it's that you never get to direct the story and write the ending, especially when you don't even know which scene you're in. She thought this was her climax, but it was just my cold, clean beginning. I started packing before the sun came up the next morning. Not in a panic. Not out of desperation. Just deliberately. Like a man finally taking down a tent after years of pretending the camping trip wasn't over. There was no suitcase. I didn't toss clothes into a duffel while wiping away tears or muttering cliches about needing space. I went out to the garage, grabbed 3 old cardboard boxes, the kind we used when we moved in together, and carried them into the bedroom while she was still asleep. I packed in silence. 2 suits. 1 navy, 1 charcoal. My black leather shoes, still polished from the last time I gave a damn. A few shirts I actually liked. My electric razor. A single pair of cufflinks I hadn't worn in over a decade but kept because they were a gift from my father. And my guitar, the Martin D15 I bought back when I still thought I'd play live gigs on weekends. It had dust on the case and a broken G-string, but it was mine. It had been there longer than she had. In the drawer of my nightstand, under old receipts and a birthday card from 2014, was a photo. Faded. Slightly bent at the corner. Me and the boys, standing on a dock, shirts off, sunburned, laughing so hard the lake behind us looked blurry. That came with me. Nothing else did. I didn't even touch her side of the closet. Not out of respect. Don't give me that much credit. It just didn't matter. None of it did. By noon, I'd hired a guy from Craigslist, mid-30s, smelled like cigarettes and peppermint, to help move the boxes into a storage unit I rented under a fake name. Paid him in cash. No questions asked. No receipts. That was the point. When I walked back into the house, the boys were still at school. She was in the shower. I could hear the water running and imagined her humming to herself, like it was just another Tuesday. Like the night before had been an empowering TED Talk and now the audience was applauding. I didn't leave a note. Not a single word. I set the house key on the kitchen counter next to the butter dish. The same counter where we used to slice apples for the kids after school. Where she once stood crying because Lucas had fallen off his bike and broken his arm. Where we whispered about retirement plans and whether we could afford to take that trip to Santa Fe one day. Now it held a key. A single, ordinary key. And I walked out the front door. Didn't look back. Didn't text the boys. Didn't call a friend to say, hey, guess what happened? I disappeared. Not as a victim. Not as some lost soul trying to find himself. No, I vanished the way a magician does, controlled, rehearsed, with your eyes focused exactly where I want them while the real trick happens somewhere else. I didn't slam the door. I didn't cry in the driveway. I didn't sit in my car and wonder what went wrong. Because I already knew. It had been going wrong in small, invisible ways for years, gasoline leaking one drop at a time until one day, without warning, the match finally hit the floor. And when it did, I didn't scream. I just packed. Quietly. Efficiently. Like a man who finally realized that sometimes walking away isn't a surrender. It's a strategy. The first whisper came from Jerry Klein, our nosy neighbor 2 doors down. The kind of man who never mowed his own lawn but could tell you how often yours needed it. He called me 3 days after I left, under the thin pretense of just checking in, like I was some wounded animal the neighborhood was tracking. Hey Reed, just wanted to say, sorry, man. We all heard. If you need anything. I let the pause hang. Then he cleared his throat and said it. There's a guy someone knew. Big guy. Drives a Ram 1500, black, shiny as hell. Been parked in your, well, the driveway. I said nothing. Just let him talk. Been there a lot. Yesterday I saw him mowing the lawn. Gym shorts. No shirt. You know, the type. The type. Right. I thanked Jerry and hung up. Didn't ask questions. Didn't take notes. Didn't even change expression. Just walked to my window, looked out over the city skyline, and let the silence settle like dust. She didn't wait a week. Not even enough time for the sheets to cool. She hadn't just moved on. She imported her replacement like a 2-day Amazon Prime delivery. And that was the first move she thought would sting. The second came when Caleb called that Saturday. His voice was tight, like he was trying to whisper in a house with no doors. Mom's friend was here again. He made us eggs this morning. Friend. Of course. That awkward label kids are trained to use when adults don't bother hiding anymore. He didn't ask who the guy was. He didn't say his name. But later, Lucas did. Travis, he muttered. Some guy she used to know from the gym. She said they reconnected. That word again. Reconnected. Like cheating now came with Bluetooth. Travis. That name meant nothing to me. Not at first. But after a little mental search, it clicked. Travis used to be in the background of her stories. A personal trainer. Gave her advice on protein powders. Sent her playlist for cardio. I'd met him once at a Christmas party. He'd shaken my hand and grinned just a bit too long. I thought he was harmless. Turns out, she didn't. I didn't rage. Didn't punch a wall or drive to the house like a maniac. Instead, I did what she never expected. I made tea. Sat by my window, watched a couple walking their dog and smiled. Not because I was okay. Because I finally understood something she never did. People like her think replacing someone is the win. That possession equals victory. That a new man mowing a lawn somehow erases the man who used to fix the gutter every winter and knew the names of every kid on the block. But I knew better. She hadn't replaced me. She just hit copy-paste on a story she thought she was writing solo. And while she was busy parading gym shorts guy through the neighborhood like a trophy, I was playing a longer game. One that didn't involve revenge or theatrics. One she couldn't even see yet. Because here's the thing. When someone swaps you out like an old couch, they assume you'll stay in the junk pile, sulking. But me? I was already 5 moves ahead. And I'd stopped playing her game the moment I picked up that guitar. It wasn't planned. Hell, it wasn't even convenient. I had no business being in that part of town, but my car needed a new radiator hose, and the shop said 2 hours. So I wandered, looking for a place to sit, kill time, drink something warm that didn't come in a paper cup with a corporate logo. That's how I ended up inside an old bookstore that smelled like cedar and forgotten dreams. The place had one of those tucked-away cafes in the back, mismatched chairs, low jazz playing, a chalkboard menu written in too much cursive. I was halfway through a burned Americano and a book I wasn't really reading when I heard a voice I hadn't heard in almost 3 decades. Read? It took me a second. At first, I didn't recognize her. Then the eyes, dark, sharp, soft at the edges. The kind of eyes that held stories no one ever fully told. Elise. She smiled like the name surprised her. Wow, I wasn't sure it was you. You look different. I looked down at my clothes, reflexively. Navy jacket, jeans, wedding ring long gone. Yeah, well, life'll do that. She sat before I could offer. Like she already knew this was going to take a while. Elise had been my college roommate's sister. Back in the day, she'd show up to parties wearing oversized sweaters and combat boots, quoting dead poets and laughing at the wrong times. I'd always liked that about her. But she got married young, moved states away, and the last I'd heard, she was raising 2 kids with some math teacher in Vermont. We never kept in touch. Coffee? She asked, already halfway to the counter. Sure, I said, watching her walk like time hadn't won yet. Slower maybe, but not defeated. She came back with 2 cappuccinos and a cinnamon scone she broke in half without asking. We didn't talk about anything important at first. Just books. Her job. My temporary relocation. I gave her vague details. She didn't pry. That silence. It was like oxygen after breathing smoke for years. It wasn't until our 3rd refill that I noticed I was laughing. Like actually laughing. Not out of politeness. Not to fill air. But the kind of laughter that hits low in the gut and almost surprises you. She told me her husband had died 2 years ago. Heart attack. Quick. Clean. Left her with 2 grown kids and 1,000 unfinished conversations. She didn't cry when she said it. She didn't soften her voice for sympathy. Just stated it. Like a line in a book she'd read too many times to get emotional about anymore. And maybe that's why it hit so hard. Not the sadness. The steadiness. We sat there for 4 hours. Never once touched on the obvious. She didn't ask why I was suddenly single. Didn't fish for details. Didn't tilt her head and say, "You okay?" Like most people do when they're really asking, "How bad did it get?" And I didn't explain. Because for the first time since that dinner table declaration, I didn't feel like I had to justify my existence. I wasn't a husband left behind. I wasn't a father fumbling for footing. I was just a man drinking cappuccino with someone who remembered the boy he used to be, but didn't judge the man he'd become. When we finally stood up to leave, the sky had turned that soft indigo shade that always makes you question time. She touched my arm lightly and said, "Same bookstore next week?" I nodded. But even as I walked away, hands in my pockets, breath fogging in the evening chill, I couldn't shake the quiet pull in my chest. Was this just nostalgia? A warm, safe flicker in the storm? Or had something shifted, small, imperceptible, but real? All I knew was that I didn't feel lost for once. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't want to disappear anymore. It was past 11 when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't answer. Thought it might be a late email or maybe Elise sending me another photo of that ridiculous cat from the bookstore window. But then I saw the name. Caleb. I froze. Not because I was scared, but because it had been weeks and he hadn't called once. Neither of them had. My boys had been polite, quiet, caught in that awkward purgatory where kids are expected to pick a side without ever being told there's a war. So I gave them space. I figured, if they needed me, they'd reach. And tonight, he had. "Hey, buddy," I said, trying to sound light. Normal. What came back wasn't a voice, it was air. Ragged breathing. Wet silence. Then, in a whisper so small I thought it was static, "Dad." I stepped out onto the balcony, away from the noise of the city, and leaned on the railing like it could anchor me. "I'm here." He didn't speak right away. Just breathed like each word he was holding in had weight. And then, "I miss how quiet it used to be." I closed my eyes. He was 11. Still had baby teeth in a drawer somewhere. Still slept with the blanket my mother had knit him before she passed. And here he was, trying to process betrayal in a house where the rules had been rewritten without him. "She's always gone now," he said. "Even when she's home, she's not. She's on her phone." texting someone, or laughing at stuff I don't get. I don't even know who comes over anymore. His voice cracked on that last sentence, like he knew he was saying too much, but didn't have anyone else to tell. I didn't ask about Travis. I didn't ask what comes over meant. And I definitely didn't ask why she was laughing at nothing. Instead, I said, "You're not crazy, Caleb. You're just seeing things clearly now. And that hurts. A lot." More silence. Then Lucas says not talk about it. He says if we pretend, it'll go back to normal. I wanted to say it won't. I wanted to say Lucas is trying to protect you. I wanted to say you're both still kids, and it should have never been your job to carry this. But I didn't. I just said, "You don't have to pretend with me." He sniffed. I don't know what to do. I looked out over the city, lights blinking like artificial stars, and tried to breathe slow. Tried to stay composed for a kid who was unraveling in real time. "You don't have to do anything," I told him. "Not now. Just remember this. You always have a place with me. No matter what she says. No matter who's mowing the lawn. If you need to talk, talk. If you need to stay over, you come. My door doesn't lock to you. Ever." His voice cracked again, this time softer. I don't feel safe." That one burned. Because that house, my asterisk house, once, was supposed to be the safest place in the world for him. For both of them. I built it for that reason. Worked double shifts, skipped vacations, installed cameras and fences and fire alarms so those boys would never have to feel afraid. And now? She'd filled it with silence and strangers. I didn't ask to be the good parent. Didn't ask for points or pity. But in that moment, I realized something she never did. When you choose your own thrill over your child's peace, you don't lose custody. You lose credibility. And once that's gone, no amount of makeup or meal prep or fake smiles in the school pickup line can win it back. Caleb stayed on the line for another 10 minutes, mostly breathing, occasionally saying, "Thanks," like it was a word he'd just learned how to mean. And when he finally hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there on the balcony in the cool night air, staring into the dark, and made a promise I wouldn't say out loud yet. If she made them collateral in her little midlife joyride, I'd stop being polite. Because love doesn't mean staying. Sometimes it means watching and waiting and being ready to catch the pieces when, not if they fall. It came at 12:47 a.m. I was half asleep on the couch, an old Coltrane record humming low in the background, a blanket across my knees, and my phone buzzed once, sharp and sudden. That kind of buzz that jerks your attention like a needle skipping across vinyl. I glanced at the screen. Marissa. No subject. Just her name sitting there like it hadn't already burned a hole through 23 years. I stared at it for a second. Maybe two. I knew the game. That hour of the night isn't when you reach out to someone you respect. It's when guilt and wine start whispering in your ear. I opened it. Asterisk. Hope you're doing okay. We should talk sometime. Asterisk. That's it. No. I know it's late. No. Sorry for how I said things in front of the boys. No. I probably should have waited before moving Travis into the house like he was the second coming of Gordon Ramsay in mesh shorts. Just 5 words, floaty and hollow like a balloon you forgot to tie. We should talk sometime. That phrase lives in the same cemetery as "let's catch up soon," and it wasn't meant to happen this way. It's not an invitation. It's bait. And I don't take bait anymore. I didn't answer. Didn't even type and erase anything for effect. I just took a slow breath, screenshotted it, and dragged the message into a folder on my desktop I'd quietly named. For later, that folder wasn't full of petty receipts. It wasn't for vengeance or leverage. It was for context, a living archive of every breadcrumb she tried to toss back after burning the damn trail. A week ago, she'd texted Lucas a thumbs up when he mentioned coming to see me for the weekend. Now she was casting lines in the dark, hoping I'd still be orbiting, some sad little moon waiting to be pulled back in by her gravity. But I wasn't in orbit. I'd left the system entirely. See, Marissa never understood that I wasn't the sentimental one. She always thought I was just quiet, that I bottled things up, that my calm was a damn holding back collapse. She never realized that my silence wasn't weakness. It was exit strategy. Because when I leave completely. Mind, heart, soul, calendar, bedroom, lawn chair, all gone. I sat there for a moment, holding the phone, watching the text dissolve into the background of my screen like it was never even there. And I let myself wonder, just for a breath, what version of me she thought she was texting? The one she humiliated in front of our boys? The one who quietly packed up and left while she slept? The one she assumed was still peeking through her blinds, wondering if she missed him yet? That version doesn't exist anymore. She wasn't talking to a man. She was texting a ghost. And the worst part? Even ghosts know when to stop replying. I didn't mean for the place to become mine. At first, it was just a rental. Neutral walls. Echoes in the hall. An address no one knew. I chose it because it was small, quiet, faceless. A place to vanish, not start over. But somehow, over time, it began to shift around me, like the apartment itself was taking a deep breath after years of someone else's noise. It started with the lighting. Not that harsh, sterile glow Marissa always insisted on. She liked everything bright, exposed, clinical. No shadows. No mystery. My apartment? Warm. Dim. Amber-tone bulbs and floor lamps with soft halos that made the corners feel safe again. It was the kind of light that didn't interrogate you. It invited you to sit down and stay a while. Books lined the shelves. Actual books. No fake staging. No color-coded showpieces. Every one of them either read, half-read, or waiting. Poetry, philosophy, cookbooks I'd never touched. Even my old Hemingway copies with coffee-stained pages made it onto the shelf like war medals. Elise helped pick the art. One Saturday afternoon, we wandered into this tiny gallery that smelled like dust and old linen. She stopped in front of this abstract painting, deep reds and smoky grays, chaotic but calm. She tilted her head and said, "That one's you." I bought it without even pretending to hesitate. It hangs above my small table now. Not quite the dining room we used to have, but the meals? Infinitely better. She cooked one night. Lemon salmon with this dill sauce that made me forget for a second that I ever used to eat microwave dinners in silence. She didn't ask what I liked, she just made what she liked, and somehow it felt like that was the point. There was jazz playing, real jazz, not the elevator crap Marissa used to throw on when guests were over to signal sophistication. We poured wine. The cheap kind, with the label half-torn. And when she set her glass down and looked around the room, she smiled and said, "You know, you're the most peaceful man I've met in years." I didn't answer right away, because it hit me somewhere deep. Not because I believed it, not yet, but because for the first time in longer than I could remember, I wasn't performing. I wasn't husbanding. I wasn't managing moods or walking on conversational eggshells. I was just there, breathing in a space that finally reflected me, not the curated version of me someone else had sculpted for appearances. She leaned in, elbows on the table, and said, "You feel like still water." I laughed at that. Quietly. Not mockingly. Just amazed. No one had ever called me still. I'd spent decades being the stabilizer in a house full of storms, the one expected to mop up the mess without acknowledging the flood. But now? Now there was no mess. Just salmon, jazz, and someone who didn't need my resume of pain to enjoy the moment. Later that night, when she left and I closed the door behind her, I stood in the middle of the room and looked around. The chair by the window. The soft clink of dishes in the sink. The smell of citrus and old books and just a hint of her perfume lingering like a question mark. I realized then it wasn't a rental anymore. It was mine. Not in a paperwork way. In a soul print way. Every corner, every lamp, every brushstroke on the wall had become a quiet rebellion against everything I used to endure in silence. This apartment wasn't a retreat. It was a becoming. And Marissa? She didn't just lose a husband. She lost a version of me that never existed outside the house she built. Because what I've built now, she wouldn't even recognize it. She wouldn't belong in it. It was bound to happen. Small town. Familiar faces. And Marissa's inner circle, those wine-soaked vipers in Lululemon, never could keep their mouths shut. I'd made the mistake of taking Elise to that little tapas spot near the river walk. You know, the one with the outdoor tables and the fairy lights strung over the patio, like someone tried to bottle a summer evening. We were laughing over sangria and something called harissa prawns when I noticed her. Camille, Marissa's self-declared ride-or-die friend, who once pulled me aside at a holiday party and whispered, asterisk, "You're too patient with her. That woman's an emotional wrecking ball." Asterisk. Of course, she said it like it was charming. Like I should be flattered. Now she was sitting across the street at a cafe table, sunglasses perched on her head like a crown, pretending not to watch. Phone clutched in her manicured hand. Texting so hard I half expected smoke to come off the screen. I didn't say anything to Elise. Didn't need to. That night, right around 9:42 p.m., the first message came through. Marissa asterisk. Asterisk, who's she? Asterisk. No greeting. No punctuation. Just urgency wrapped in passive aggression. I didn't respond. 12 minutes later. Are the boys around her? Oh, there it was. The maternal angle. The implied concern. As if she was picturing Elise feeding them mystery stew and whispering anti-Marissa propaganda during board games. Another 20 minutes. This time shorter. Just curious. That one made me laugh. Like she was casually browsing an old catalog and suddenly remembered she used to own the model on the cover. I let the phone sit, watched a rerun of Frasier, poured a small glass of bourbon, and finally, typed a reply. They're safe. And so am I. That was it. No explanation. No invitation to dialogue. Just 6 words that said more than an essay ever could. Because here's the thing. She wasn't asking about Elise. She was asking about her own position in my world. And finding out she'd been replaced not just physically, but energetically, emotionally, was never in her playbook. Marissa had always imagined I'd remain some ghost of a man, orbiting her life in quiet regret, glancing back whenever she snapped her fingers. But now, she couldn't see me anymore, and it terrified her. After that message, she didn't reply. Not that night. Not the next morning. But I know her. She read it 15 times, minimum. Probably showed it to Camille. Probably tried to decipher it like it was code. What she didn't realize, what she still doesn't get, is that I don't owe her anything anymore. Not a breadcrumb. Not a reaction. Not a seat at the table I rebuilt from ashes she lit herself. She can text. She can call. She can fish for relevance in the form of late-night check-ins and veiled jealousy dressed up as parental concern. But my silence? That's not a wound. It's a locked door, and she's standing on the wrong side of it. They showed up on a Friday. Backpacks slung too low, sneakers muddy from the shortcut through the park, faces carrying that awkward mix of hope and caution, like they didn't quite believe I'd opened the door. But I did. Lucas, 16 now, taller than me and suddenly using cologne like it's body armor. Caleb, 11, gripping the same duffel he's had since 3rd grade, zipper frayed and one strap duct-taped like a badge of loyalty. Neither said a word at first. Just stood there in the hallway like I might be mad, or worse, indifferent. I stepped aside. You hungry? Both heads nodded fast. We didn't talk about why they came. I didn't ask what weekend at Dad's meant on her calendar or what scene led to their quiet rebellion. I just turned on the waffle iron, tossed on some Marvin Gaye, and let the place do the work. By Saturday morning, the ice had cracked. Caleb asked if I still had the box of Legos we used to build submarines with. Lucas found my old vinyls and tried to act unimpressed, but by track 3 of The Wall, he was asking questions I hadn't heard from him in years. Wait. So you had to flip the record to hear the rest? Yup. That's actually kinda sick. Waffles. Music. No judgment. Just 3 people sharing oxygen again. Later that evening, after a movie none of us really watched, Lucas hung back in the kitchen while I loaded the dishwasher. The kind of pause that's usually followed by a confession or a question. Instead, he said it like an observation. You seem happier. Not surprised. Not skeptical. Just curious. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and looked at him. His face had started to shift, no longer the round softness of a kid, but not yet the sharp lines of a man. He looked like he was halfway through a sentence life hadn't finished writing yet. I nodded. Not happy because of anyone. Just free. He didn't ask what that meant. Maybe he already knew. Or maybe he just liked hearing someone say it without bitterness clinging to the syllables. We stayed up late that night. No screens. Just stories. I told them about the time I failed my driving test at 17 because I couldn't parallel park to save my life. Caleb laughed so hard he nearly dropped his hot chocolate. Lucas rolled his eyes, but he was smiling. The shift was subtle, but it was there. Less tension in their shoulders. Fewer glances at their phones. They weren't waiting for approval anymore. They were being. And that felt like a miracle. Not because I needed to win some imagined custody war, but because for the first time in months, I saw my boys as mine again, not property, not pawns, not names on a schedule. Just my sons. Later, as they both dozed off in sleeping bags on the living room floor, I sat in my chair, sipping lukewarm coffee and watching the slow rise and fall of their breathing. They had chosen to come here, without prompting, without guilt, and what I gave them in return was simple presence. No lectures, no pressure, just waffles and Pink Floyd and the kind of peace you don't have to explain. And as I sat there in the quiet, I realized something. You can lose a marriage. You can lose a house. You can lose the rhythm of what used to be called normal. But if you stay still long enough, if you build something honest, even in the rubble, sometimes they find their way back to you. Not because you begged, but because you never stopped being home. Thursday night. Low jazz playing from the Bluetooth speaker tucked behind the bookshelf. Pasta simmering on the stove, something Elise insisted on trying with white wine, lemon zest, and far too many capers. The apartment smelled like garlic and warmth. There were 2 candles lit on the small wooden table I'd stained by hand last month, mostly out of boredom, partly out of pride. Her laughter, Elise's, had just bounced off the walls when the knock came. 3 sharp raps. Not the usual lazy buzz of a delivery guy, not the polite knock of a neighbor. This one had rhythm, purpose. Elise paused mid-pour, the wine bottle suspended in her hand like a question mark. I glanced at her. She raised an eyebrow. I gave a small shrug and went to answer it. Didn't check the peephole. Didn't brace myself. I wasn't expecting her. But there she stood. Marissa, hair pinned up like she was trying to remind someone, maybe herself, that she still had control over how she presented to the world. Light makeup. That same coat she used to wear to PDA meetings when she wanted to look approachable. But her eyes were anything but. Tense. Sharp. Scanning. Hey, she said, with that breathy voice she used when she wanted to sound casual, but couldn't quite swallow the nerves. I was nearby. The boys left a charger. Figured I'd grab it while I was out. She didn't hold up a phone. Didn't show me any text from the boys. Just stood there, waiting. Like she expected the door to swing wide and the familiar script to begin again. Me, accommodating. Her, superior but wounded. The world, still revolving around her timing. But I didn't step aside. I didn't invite her in. I just stood there in the frame, blocking her view. Until she leaned a little. And that's when it happened. Her gaze slipped past my shoulder. Past the soft light. Past the flicker of candles. And landed on her. Elise. Sitting at the dinner table in a navy blouse, sleeves rolled up, still holding the wine bottle. She smiled politely, not mocking, not smug. Just present. Whole. And Marissa's whole body language changed. Her shoulders tensed. Her chin dropped slightly. A flash of something crossed her face. Confusion first, then calculation, then disbelief. She tried to catch up. You could see the gears turning behind her eyes, trying to match the name to the face, and then to the memory. Elise had been at a party once, years ago. The quiet widow Marissa used to pity with a sprinkle of disdain. She never really got over her husband. She'd once whispered while topping off a wine glass, like grief had an expiration date, and Elise had missed the memo. Now, that same woman was laughing in my dining room. In my new life. With me. Marissa blinked. Is that? But I didn't give her the full sentence. Yup. She hesitated, eyes flicking back to me like she was trying to reframe the scene in real time. Figure out where she went wrong. You two are? I raised an eyebrow. Having dinner. Anything else is none of your business. She tried to smile. A tight, brittle thing. I just came for the charger. I nodded once, stepped back half an inch, reached onto the small side table where Caleb had left it last weekend, and held it out. She took it, fingers brushing mine for a second too long. And still, she didn't leave. Her eyes kept darting back inside, to the candles, to the full glasses of wine, to the music, to the woman who wasn't flinching in her presence. She wanted something to grab onto. A crack in the facade. A reason to still feel superior. But there wasn't one. This wasn't a stunt. This wasn't revenge. This was life. Lived well. Without her. Finally, I tilted my head and asked, anything else? She opened her mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. No, she said quietly. That's all. I nodded and gently shut the door. And behind it, Elise smiled at me like she knew exactly what had just happened, even if no words were said. Because that knock? That wasn't about a charger. That was about seeing who I'd become without her. And realizing, too late, that she never even knew who I was. She didn't leave right away. Even after I handed her the charger and closed the door, I saw the shadow of her feet still outside, motionless, like maybe she thought I'd come back. Maybe she was waiting for a second act, an explanation, a reversal. But none came. Inside, Elise didn't ask what that was about. She just took a sip of her wine and looked toward the candles, then back at me. "Everything okay?" she asked, almost amused. I nodded, took a seat across from her, and tried to return to the moment. But my mind wasn't on the lemon capers anymore. It was on her face. That moment, the instant Marissa's eyes landed on Elise, was so sharp, so surgically clean, I could almost hear the snap of whatever fantasy she'd been nursing. She didn't just recognize her. She remembered her. And not fondly. Elise wasn't just some harmless woman from the bookstore. She was her old friend. And in Marissa's world, old friend meant discarded accessory. They'd met years ago at a church event, when both of them still wore polite smiles and swapped gluten-free recipes over herbal tea. Back then, Elise had been newly widowed, quiet, maybe a little too soft-spoken for Marissa's taste. I remembered coming home once to Marissa on the phone, pacing and smirking. "She's sweet," she said, rolling her eyes, "but stuck. I mean, how long do you mourn before it gets weird? She needs to get out of that fog." That was her take on a woman who'd buried a husband and raised 2 kids alone. Marissa didn't hate Elise. She dismissed her. And that made this dinner so much worse, for her. Because Elise wasn't just present at my table. She was glowing. She laughed like she meant it. Her eyes sparkled with curiosity. She listened, and she heard. She belonged in that space. Not as a placeholder, but as something real. Something earned. Marissa had spent years assuming I'd always settle back into her gravitational pull. Even after the divorce speech. Even after Travis and his obnoxious truck. Even after the cold text at 12:47 a.m. She still believed she was the sun, and I was just a wandering rock waiting to return to orbit. And now? Now she'd seen me with someone who had absolutely no interest in playing her games. Someone who knew her, but didn't fear her. Who outgrew her without even trying. That's what turned her pale. Not jealousy. Irrelevance. "You too," she'd said at the door, flat as drywall. Not curious. Not shocked. Just trying to find her footing on a floor that was suddenly shifting. I hadn't replied. Just raised my glass, casually. No smirk. No explanation. Because there are moments you don't dilute with words. That dinner table wasn't just a setting. It was a verdict. A quiet, devastating reminder that some bridges don't burn with fire. Some just disappear beneath your feet while you're too busy looking behind you. And in that moment, with candlelight dancing off Elise's smile and the faint sound of Chet Baker in the background, I didn't feel victorious. I felt done, and judging by the look on her face, so did she. The click of the door was soft. Final. Not dramatic, not angry, just done. Like the closing line of a sentence that didn't need a period because the silence said more. I stood there for a moment, looking at the wood grain, the brass handle still faintly warm from her hand. I didn't feel rage. I didn't feel regret. I didn't even feel satisfaction. I felt nothing. Not the numb, empty kind of nothing. Not the dangerous apathy that follows heartbreak. This was different. This was peace. Behind me, the candlelight danced across the apartment's white walls, casting shadows that made the room feel deeper, fuller. The garlic still lingered in the air. The cork from the wine bottle lay on the counter like a forgotten detail. The jazz had shifted to something slower, sadder, but not depressing, just honest. I turned. Elise was still at the table, cradling her glass, watching me, not like she was waiting for a report, or a reaction, or even a story. Just present. Her eyes didn't ask, what did she want? They said, "Are you back?" And I was. I pulled out my chair and sat down. No dramatic sigh. No drawn-out reflection. Just the small, simple return to a place I no longer had to explain myself in. Elise gave me a knowing smile. That kind of smile that says, "You don't owe me a single word. But I'm glad you're here, *." I raised my glass to her. Not in celebration, not in pettiness, but in recognition of everything I'd walked through, of everything I'd let go, of everything I'd survived. I didn't have to win, didn't need to make her jealous or prove I was happier. That was never the point. The point was this: that I had finally, made it to a space where I wasn't performing. Not for a wife, not for neighbors, not even for my sons. I was simply being whole, unapologetically unfinished, still learning how to cook salmon without overdoing it, still figuring out how to make room on a bookshelf for new chapters. But here, in this room, with this woman, with this life, and when I leaned back in that chair, a quiet breath escaped my chest, long, unforced, full. It was the kind of breath I hadn't taken in years, and it didn't belong to anyone else. Not her, not the past, not the man I used to be when silence was survival. It belonged to me, and for once, that was enough.